So you'll see my name is the third one on this list, which means I did the least of the work. The work I'm presenting was done by Florian, who was taken ill, unfortunately. I was mentoring him together with Amrish, and I think Liz is his supervisor or his official mentor. And what Florian's been doing is he has been, first of all, take a step back. What are we measuring and why? So the internet it matters now. It's not a hobby project anymore for nerds living in their basements and researchers living at universities sharing email. The internet matters now. If you break the internet, payments stop working. There was a nice slide earlier you had there. I have 15 euro in my pocket and I can't extract more money from a cash point. Yeah, Bangladesh noticed this in August last year. They had a little domestic recalibration and they turned off some of their internet infrastructure, including the DNS. And they quickly noticed that none of the domestic payment systems worked anymore because they relied on the DNS working. And if you turn off the DNS, everything breaks. So what Florian's done is he's tried to measure how resilient the DNS is to all sorts of failures. He's not necessarily looking at specific things like domestic recalibrations or submarine cable failures or any of that sort of thing. He's just looking at more generically, how resilient is this thing to failures of all sorts? So he's, first of all, trying to figure out how the hell do we measure this thing? What is there to measure? Oh, I need to click the right thing. There we go. What is there to measure? What can we observe? And what do we even see of the system outside the box? So it turns out that you can measure the things that are visible in the DNS, but you can't really measure organizational processes. You can't really measure how people maintain their DNS servers other than are they working or not. From the outside, a DNS server is either on or it's off. It's responding to queries or it's not. So if you look at the resolution graph as a whole, the only observable metrics are, can I resolve this domain? And how long does it take? Or can I not resolve it? Or is it taking longer or a shorter amount of time? So Florian's research focuses on these observable characteristics and not on, well, things he can't measure. There we go. So as Dipsy said earlier, he did the little dance of how we resolve domains, and the resilience of any zone in the DNS will necessarily depend on how resilient its parent zone is and how resilient the name servers of the parent zone are. Because it's a recursive process, you don't look at every zone individually. You need to look at the entire dependency graph. And these dependency graphs, I'll show a little picture later, is pretty complex because there are circular dependencies. There's lots of different nodes in different places, and you need to look at it you need to look at the entire graph. So what Florian's done is he's extracting resilience measures based on the DNS servers of a zone. He's not looking at the zone itself, he's looking at the DNS servers. And he quickly realized that he needs to account for what we call transitive dependencies. So you inherit the resilience of your parent zones. You also inherit the resilience of other zones depending on which servers your DNS is delegated to. So he's found a new method to try to graph this and to try to solve the graph and come up with a number, a score of how resilient this whole thing is. So, yeah. Press one button, press the other button, carry on. There's a couple of different metrics we can look at to see how resilient this thing is. So we can see how many DNS servers have you got. If you've got one DNS server and it breaks, you're gone. Sorry, goodbye. You can look at the number of IP addresses of your authoritative name servers. If you have one authoritative name server and it has two IP addresses, you can reach one of them, but not the other. You're still fairly okay. Not fairly okay. It's still manifestly terrible if you've only got one of them, but you're in slightly better shape than the guy with one IP address and one DNS server. We can take a look at where these IP addresses are hosted, which ASs are they in. If all of your DNS servers are inside the same AS, and that AS goes off the internet, you're off the internet, right? So if you stick your DNSs in two different autonomous systems, you're in slightly better shape than the guy with one autonomous system. All very good. We can look at Anycast. Does everyone know what Anycast is? Other than black magic? Okay. Some people are too shy to answer. So Anycast is a way of announcing the same IP address from different places around the intranet. So you have one IP address, one prefix, and you announce it in a whole bunch of different places. So if one of those locations goes down, your IP address is still reachable because you can find a different route to it. So Anycast protects you against routing failures or different problems in the routing system. And then it gets a little bit more interesting for DNS nerds in the room. We can look at the number of TLDs of your NS names. So imagine you have a domain in one TLD and your DNS servers are in another TLD. You're now inheriting the reliability or the resilience of that other TLD into your resiliency graph. And then we can look at where are your servers physically located. If they're all in the same place on a small Pacific island that's underwater, you're not going to be very resilient. Whereas if your DNS servers are in one of the best connected places on Earth, you might be a bit more resilient. We come up with this fun little graph, and Florian's picked a really nice one for this example. He's looking at IANAservers.net, which has 4 NS records. It's got 1, 2, 3 of them are in bailiwick and have glue. And then it's got a referral to ns.icann.org, which is out of bailiwick, but it's also in another TLD. So if we look at icann.org, and this is why I think this is a really good example, is it uses 3 of the same name servers as IANAservers.net, and it uses its own in bailiwick as well. So we can graph this out, and it looks a bit like this. If you've studied mathematics at all and you remember your graph theory, this is not a graph you like to see. It's not a friendly graph. It's not a fun graph. It's got little circles in it, and it's got things pointing at each other and at themselves. So how do we solve this? How do we try to score a dependency? So your resilience depends on, can you get to the root? That's nice. The root points at net. That's all right. That's not a problem. But then net points at org. So you've inherited a dependency on org in your net domain. Your net domain also depends 3/4 on org, because three of your org nsicann.org servers depend on servers that live in the net domain. So what Florian's done is he's assigned scores to all of these things. And I need to press this button too. So whether you can resolve something depends on whether you can resolve your parent zone. So you need to somehow quantify what sort of influence your parent zone has on you. So we try to measure the importance of your dependency. Is your dependency very important, or is your dependency not so important? And then to compute a final score, what Florian does is he enumerates all the possible resolution paths and he assigns a score to it. Fun? There we go. At the end of the day, you come up with a weighted graph, and this slide is very mathematical and very far away from what I actually do. If you're interested in it, I refer you to Amrish or to Florian. But as an operations monkey, understand it, this basically says in very scientific and mathematical terms what I sing to operators around the world. Your importance, your dependency on your parents depends on the aggregate of what parents you inherit. So that's how this works. So to try to prove that this model works, a lot of data were collected from a lot of different places. So interestingly, certificate transparency gives you a lot of good domain information. A lot of certificate transparency logs came in here. CZDS is ICANN's, ICANN or IANA? It's ICANN's centralized zone database. So if you ask nicely, you can get the entire zone file of any number of TLDs for your enjoyment. You just have to tell them that you're a researcher and you're doing nice things with them, and they will send you the zone file. As well as CZDS, Florian got some data from a couple of CCTLDs, SC, NU, EE, etc. There's some open data as well, and then the usual Tranco lists, which have been mentioned before. I have problems with the Tranco list, but I won't go into them. So he came up with a huge list of domains, I think about nearly 1 billion domains in total, 922 million domains. So that's a reasonable subset of domains to go and look at from different data sets. So when he goes and measures this, there's a couple of fun things you can see. The top 1 million domains usually tend to have about 2 name servers on average. IPv6, IPv4, depends a bit. But one of the interesting things I think came out of this is that deployments with IPv6 tend to have fewer addresses in fewer ASs and rely less on Anycast. So IPv6 is less reliable in the DNS than IPv4, which I think is a little bit strange. And I think I raised this point yesterday that IPv4 best practices are broadly well implemented, but then IPv6 is forgotten about. I think I mentioned this in the context of the ICMPv6 amplification attacks. Why is BCP38 implemented for IPv4 but not for IPv6? Why, if you're deploying a DNS for IPv4, you've done all the right things. You've got your 2 name servers, you've got them in different places, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then IPv6, you just go, oh, one's enough. So I thought that was really interesting. There's a lot of really good data, and you should go and read Florian's poster. But those are the sort of things that came out of this research. It's also really interesting to see how different domains or different sets of domains are different or have different resilience scores by this model. But there's a couple of other things you can see. More Anycast on IPv4 than on IPv6, which is odd because Anycast is easier with IPv6 than with IPv4. So why is this? Right? So there's a nice here's the more colorful version of what I've just been singing. As I said, these are not my slides. If they were my slides, there'd be more comics in them. So you can look at all these different metrics on different axes he's got. And I think this is the 1 million resolvable Tranco zones. It's really interesting to see how these scores change. And I really like the model he's used. So the tooling he's got is something called YoDNS, which goes and looks at DS, DNS key, CDS, etc., and text records. And his full scan for, is this all the domains, Sabrish? Do you remember? Yeah, so for all his domains, a full scan takes 40 days, which is not a huge amount of time, but it does take a while to do this. And you get 87 terabytes of data out, which is nice, I think. And there's the obligatory little dashboard, which I've not seen. I would like access to this dashboard. So it shows how many domains have been resolved and then how many he's resolving per second. So there's more metadata to be gleaned from his measurements. So I would like to, as a next step, what I would like to do, if I had all the money and all the funding in the world, is I'd like to look at the tooling. Can we make this tooling better to measure things like latency? And can we use this to measure things like, if you have a dependency score of X, where can you go from here? What can you learn from that? And because I'm the kindness priest, I bullied Amrish into putting this slide in. Kindness is to DNS as manners is to routing. So kindness is a set of good practices, which a lot of us have been teaching for about 25 years on how to make the DNS not break. These are the guidelines that are universally ignored by people who run DNS infrastructure. So there's a couple of practices that kindness teaches, which is DNSSEC and key management. This is something that you can monitor or measure using Florian's methodology here. So that's good. Kindness also wants you to limit your zone transfers. That's also possible to test with these metrics, because while you're doing queries for NS records, DS records, and all the other records, you can also check, can I transfer the zone? So Florian's been measuring for each of his 823 domains. Can I transfer the zone? Great, wonderful. Another kindness practice for which data are available and have been made visible. Of course, number 4, number 5, and number 6 are the obvious sort of kindness requirements. If you have DNS servers, you must put them in different networks. You must have 2 of them or more, and you have to have network diversity. The one new one here is software diversity. What these measurements can also do is they can do a chaos text query and see what DNS server is serving this zone. Of course, many DNS servers will reply absolute nonsense to a chaos text query, but at least there's some kind of measure there. Different degrees of nonsense still tell you different things, right? I think the most important or the most interesting 2 slides in this entire presentation were this one. So it's really interesting to see how IPv4 and IPv6 are more or less in tandem when it comes to IP addresses. But if you look at the ASs they're in, the data change. Why not do it right for IPv6 if you're doing it right for IPv4? And these are a lot of domains, right? This is 800,000 of them, or it's a million of them. I don't know. It's a lot of domains. Why are the data different for IPv4 and IPv6? I thought that was interesting. And the other slide, which I thought was really interesting, is the graph. This makes it obvious that you are dependent on, you inherit a lot of dependencies from your parent zones. And I think it's important to highlight this to people who run DNS servers. It's important which names you stick them in. You're inheriting the resilience of your parent zone and the parent zones of your DNS servers, right? So with that, I'm going to go to the last question, which says, I hope this was interesting. Of course, yes, the questions. Florian, if you're on the call listening, I'm sorry for butchering your work.
Thank you for the presentation, very interesting. I will not comment too much about the content because I would not necessarily qualify myself as a DNS nerds, as you say. So I will leave that to the DNS nerds that have access to the secret data that you can only access if you know a guy in ICANN, which maybe is a problem as well. I met a guy from ICANN on the board at ITF. Maybe he can hook me up. I just wanted to, let's say, connect to your topic on kindness that seems to be very important for certain pieces of infrastructure. And I would invite, given that we're here at ISOC, who has a 50-50 vision to grant access to humans on the internet, have the ability to connect, and maybe it's worth being a bit more careful about the choice of words, such as, for example, domestic recalibration, I think is a little bit insulting towards people that are literally dying in certain places around the world. Like, it's not, I think, thoughtful to use these kinds of words and present this information in a way that it perhaps seems a little bit more complex than what it really is. Because ultimately, yeah, the internet should be for humans, right? And it's nice that it became something outside of the basement of nerds. But since it's outside of the basement of nerds, let's make it something that's outside of the basement of nerds and for people that don't want to sit in basements in front of their computer. I don't know, just a general comment on that, maybe food for thought.
Yeah. So to your first observation, CZDS is completely open. So you can go to, is it czds.icann.org, you create an account and you request all the TLDs you're interested in. Most of the TLDs you will get right away. No questions asked. You'll get the zone files. You can get them. I think there's once a day you can download them, or once every week. I don't remember what the rules are. It's not, no. So you don't need to do a zone transfer. You get them via HTTP. And so you can set up, and I think there's rsync as well. There's several different ways. I don't remember how it works. It's been a while. I might be talking through my hat about some of it. But it's really easy to get the zone files. I spent quality time with CZDS about a year ago looking at some of the vanity TLDs for companies because I was interested in seeing how much infrastructure was actually in those new vanity TLDs. So you can get those data by simply asking for them. So most of the well-used and widely used TLDs, you'll get the zone file without any questions asked. You need to say that you're a researcher. What's a researcher, right? They give you a list of rules about what you can and cannot do with the data. I can, yes. As to your other comment about terminology, that's just the best name. That's my little euphemism. I completely agree with you that it is tragic. And I'm not going to apologize for my terminology. I'm just going to say that there's different ways of putting different things. Yes, I agree it's tragic that people are dying, and I agree that it's important to have infrastructure that works for everyone at all times. But it's also nice to just, we're talking about research here. Let's keep it light. There's other venues for the brutally sharp-edged words on things. Thank you for these comments. I'll relay them. But do look at CZDS. It's really interesting to look at some of the TLDs, what's in them. What I like to see the spread of infrastructure between different TLDs. It's interesting how much infrastructure lives in net, but how little infrastructure lives in .vanity TLD of certain banks. What does that say about a bank's faith in their own TLD infrastructure? You have .giant bank TLD, but all of your infrastructure relies on your infrastructure in .net or in .com. .cat is, right, yes. So cat is in net, cat, DE, and ES, which is interesting. Following Florian's model, cat has 5 DNS servers authoritative for the cat TLD, and one of those is in bailiwick. So one of them is in switch.nic.cat. So that one's an internal dependency and notionally under control. 2 of them are under net.
If you wanted to ask anything about cat, we have the guy here, one in the front.
You are .cat? You run .cat?
No,
you run .cat.
He's sitting, he's trying to hide.
Oh, you're trying to hide. .cat, you have one DNS server in .cat. You've got 2 of them are in .net, one of them in .de, and one of them in .es, which is it's an interesting choice. So it really is interesting how much infrastructure lives in .net. If you take .net out, a lot of stuff disappears because there's a lot of stuff in, say, he.net. If you take he.net runs a public Anycast DNS server for free for anyone who asks nicely. If you take ns.he.net away, a whole lot of stuff breaks. A lot of infrastructure domains are also in net. To go back to my little graph here earlier, IANAservers.net is where a lot of infrastructure domains live under IANAservers.net. If net goes away, all of that stuff goes away, right? If net goes away, .org also goes away because, goes away for 3 quarters because 3 of its 4 DNS servers have referrals into .net. So you're inheriting the resilience of net into your domain.
Hopefully my question is going to be with a much shorter answer.
No, DNS has no short answers.
Have you thought how to validate the resiliency metric? So you have a resiliency metric, which, to be frank, is quite cool and it makes a lot of sense to me. But have you thought about how to validate it?
I think that was in the future work paragraph. I refer to him sitting next to you. I'm just the ops monkey. Yes, he has thought about validating this. And he also pointed out that it turns out that it's really difficult to measure this stuff at scale because the model, not this slide, the other one, this graph quickly blows out of proportion, and the computational complexity of solving these graphs quickly becomes really difficult. So validating this model is harder than it looks. And from an operations perspective, I think that doesn't really matter because I don't think you really need to validate all the data. What I think you can do is you can check if the model works or if the model holds for a subset of, or for a representative subset.
Like validating with a sample is also validating.
Yes.
So I had an intuition. If I was an insurance provider, which is probably one of the most boring works in the world, and I had to provide an insurance for being right or wrong on your resiliency metric, if I deviate from that, basically the resiliency metric is not optimal. Might be good to know. But anyhow, that could be a simple way to do a partial validation.
Yes. That reminds me of what your question was in the back. It was about kindness, the kindness guidelines and how they're universally ignored. I think these data show how important kindness really is. So kindness are best practices of how and where you should run your DNS, how you should run your DNS services, but also according to the people who run DNS servers. But the 4, 5, and 6 here is the ones that have always been accepted since RFC 1034, I think, since DNS was first conceived, is for this thing to work, you should have your authoritative servers, you should have your 5 and 6 particularly, you should have your 2 distinct name servers, and they should be in different networks and in different geographies. And that requirement or that best practice holds recursively. Yeah. So manners is a nice name for what the routing people have been teaching for 25, 30 years. Kindness is now, let's try to use a nice name for what we've been teaching in the DNS for 25 or 30 years. Kindness guidelines, it's worth looking at them. So it's not a one-size-fits-all tick box exercise. It's a little essay about each of the requirements and how they came about.
Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
And I have a question regarding the Anycasts before V6, which I find curious.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Anycast providers that are providing basically the services on V4, I'm wondering whether there's a new set of Anycast providers providing on V6, because essentially for the zones that are on Anycast on V4, I would imagine that automatically become available on V6. But then when I see the difference, I wonder, is it because there's a new set of Anycast providers that come up on V6 only that are just doing that? Or what has happened in that?
I really don't know. And that's why I thought these data were really interesting.
Yes.
Because I thought exactly the same thing you did. If you're doing IPv4 writes, you'll be doing IPv6 writes automatically, because many of the large Anycast providers have added IPv6 to their IPv4, and they basically run in tandem. I think the odd one out is Microsoft. So Azure does not do IPv6 quite the same way as everyone else. I don't know. I have not looked at it closely, but I think that's probably one source of the step function between IPv4 and v6, because they're a very large provider. There's a lot of DNS in there, and they're also a very large provider for a lot of the domains in the data sets Florian studied. I've not looked closely, so again, I might be speaking through my hat. And I really can't think of any other theories of why. So this is why this is so super interesting, and why it's also super interesting to bring these data. So for all these researchers in the room, it is super interesting that you're doing this research. And please, if you see an ops monkey, stop them in the street and talk to them about your research, because you're showing us what you can observe of the infrastructure we're running from outside our little world inside the system.
Yes, thank you, Philip. So we have a question from Romain, and yeah, that's it.
So just one comment for the Anycast. I guess you're using Rafael's Anycast.
Yes.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be that this data set cover less IPv6. It could be also just a bias in this data set. So it could be nice to double check this.
Yeah.
No, but I guess you could just check for Anycast. You could just use write atlas.
Well, you can't. Well, no, you can't. So that's the thing. There is no magic bit that says this prefix is Anycast. There's no Anycast community. There is nothing.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying you could use active measurement for just like pinging it from two different locations and seeing how far you are.
And if those two different locations have the same path to your Anycast server, you still don't know.
Wow, okay. We could work on that. But actually, my question was not about that. The question was, we worked with Rafael a bit on getting that data and pushing this to Yellow Pages. And I remember there was a few cases. So maybe this is just corner cases. But there was a few cases where the NS1, so like one of the authoritative name server is going to a server and everything is fine. But then the NS2 is going to 8.8.8.8 or 1.1.1. And it actually checked the two distinct name servers, two different locations. But it's of course wrong. I wonder if this is something that Florian looked at or if it's...
I don't know. I think the data sets he looked at, or the lists of domains he looked at, are sufficiently well known that they actually work, at least on average. So I think the data set is not going to have too many domains in them that delegate to 8888 or 1111.
But it's still working. You still have one of the...
Yes, you still have one path through the tree that works.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting.
Because I guess the tree will look okay.
The tree will look okay, but only 50% of it will work. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip.
I'm being kicked
again.
So,
And now we will move to the privacy session with Mohammed Samir Ahmed.
it's really easy to get me to start talking about DNS. It's really difficult to get me to stop.